Hello again. Good morning. This is Jeff Nasanov. Welcome back to the Space Madness podcast. And today we have again with us Les Johnson, who is I'm grateful, who's graciously making time for me today on a busy press tour day. Hopefully you can find him on TV later. But this part two is sort of continuing the exploration of his journey. Where we stopped last time was when he became the chief technologist at Marshall. But there's so much going on today in real time, as I think today is the closest approach to the moon with Artemis II, that I am sure that all of these subjects are going to come together. So Les, welcome back. And why don't we start with becoming the chief technologist and really even, defining it. Every center has their own version of that role, but what does it actually mean?
Well, Jeff, thanks for your interest in what I do and for having me back on the show. It was a pleasure to have that discussion the first time. You're pretty good at pulling out of people the interesting bits, I think. So hopefully
Well,
this
thank you.
won't
Thank you.
continue that trend. Yeah, no, a chief technologist, it means different things depending on where you are. When people think of tech, the general definition of tech these days is not space, it's computers, right? And so when people think of a CTO or a chief technologist for a tech company or a tech organization, they almost always fall into the computer side of it, right? Internet, AI, whatever. And it was relevant for me because people found out I was a CTO at NASA and they thought I was like the chief information officer and I get all this stuff and that's not my thing.
Yeah.
But a chief technology officer for NASA means hardware, space hardware, things that are required not only for human missions, but robotic missions, things like propulsion, power, communications, avionics, which are the electrical systems, innovations in guidance, navigation, control. How do you tell where you are, where you're going, survivability in the radiation environment. And then on the human side, it all the way goes down to life support, all those kind of things. And as chief technologist, it meant that I was responsible for setting the direction for the areas of responsibility at the Marshall Space Flight Center, where I worked in Huntsville, which is primarily propulsion, some power, a lot of avionics, and life support, regenerating, recycling water, regenerating air, getting rid of carbon, and looking at new technologies, which is the fun part for me. That's the chief technologist of what we can do in the future that'll allow us to do those jobs better, either with cheaper, less expensive systems, higher performance systems, more robust systems, just trying to improve the state of the art and all those things so we can go farther in space.
Okay. Fantastic. Yeah, there's an interesting parallel with the more Silicon Valley CTO, but I would imagine that there it's more hands-on in configuring software stacks of systems, but at a NASA center, there's maybe a little more separation. Now, I did neglect one thing in our introduction to say Happy Easter. I know that's a big part of your life and career, and I'm actually really curious from your faith perspective on Artemis II. We can get to that. The meaning of these grand exploration campaigns, but I'm sure that we can get to that in the conversation. So how it's interesting your definition of the chief technologist role. There's a colleague of mine on LinkedIn who was the chief technologist at JPL in the 90s, and he wrote an interesting post, one of those frank and honest posts that are so rare, basically that it's easy for NASA centers to really try and project an image that they're trying to create new technologies to enable new missions. And that certainly happens, but something that happens a lot more. And in my limited time slice of JPL, that's what I saw that often. It's the missions that decide what technologies need to be developed. And that back and forth probably defines NASA for its entire existence. But I wonder what, from your perspective as chief technologist, what you think about that.
Well, that yin
Balance,
and
I
yang.
guess.
Yeah, that yin and yang is there. We call it mission pull and tech push. And mission pull always has higher funding. A particular mission needs to have a certain capability, so you identify the tech that needs to be advanced to give them the capability, and that's what you go do. I built my career on tech push all the way. And what that means is, hey, I've got an idea that'll allow you to do your mission better. You may not know you need it, but I'm going to convince you do. And actually, I was successful at that several times and got flight demonstrations and tech that moved forward toward future infusion into the mission, right? And so I really tried to make it as much as possible a technology push. And I didn't have a big budget. Chief technologist doesn't have a lot of money that he or she directs personally, but we do influence the contract awards under Small Business Innovative Research Program, which is a lot of money government wide. And we also had some influence in how the center and the agency would direct its investment dollars for technology. So I helped
Okay.
advise the people at NASA headquarters,
Uh,
we also had a NASA chief technologist at that
sure.
time who kind of did the same kind of thing for the agency. But a lot of it is the mission saying, hey, I need to do this,
Hmm.
develop this capability. That's correct.
So, so that's an interesting distinction. So from our last conversation, I would assume that your push sort of practice was a driven by your kind of personal passion on that level, starting from there, moving forward. Did you find you were kind of pushing against a wall when
Well,
when you kept seeing the missions doing the pulling, but you were personally driven to do the pushing?
to an extent. But,
Mm,
I also believe that you can be an idealist, but you have to deal with reality too,
mm,
right? And so as much as I would be frustrated by the system, I
mm,
didn't let it make me angry or too frustrated because it's the system and you're
yeah.
stuck with it, right? And you just have to learn how to work in the system.
Hmm.
And let me just give a quick example that could sound terribly bureaucratic and numb your brain.
There, yeah.
I started working on solar sails back in the early
Hmm.
2000s and got some
Hmm.
funding to do that. And we were developing the tech. And as reviewing the literature, I could see that this would make a tremendous difference in the field
Hmm.
of studying the sun called
Hmm.
heliophysics. And they had expressed some interest off and on. But I thought, this isn't getting their attention. I'm not getting their attention.
Hmm.
How do I get their attention? Well, then I found out about this process called the decadal survey.
Hmm.
And the decadal survey basically is where NASA's science office goes to the National Academy of Science every 10 years and says,
Hmm.
what should be our priorities for the next 10 years, right? So they go before the decade's out so that when a new decade begins, they've got a blueprint from an independent
Hmm.
commission that says this is what you need to do. And that's missions and technologies to enable those missions. And that's how you get the tech pull.
Hmm.
Okay. So what I did is I got with some other creative people who are solar sail people and some scientists who were farsighted, and we wrote
Hmm.
a white paper that I sent to the decadal survey
Hmm.
was upcoming that said, hey, you need to consider this and look at all these scientists and engineers that think you need to consider it. Got a
Hmm.
call. We want you to present to the National Academy of Science. I
Okay.
presented to the NAC. They took my presentation. A year and a half later, the new
Hmm.
decadal survey came out. Guess what? There was tech pull for what had
Hmm.
been tech push. That turned on the money. That's how we
Well,
got the Near Earth Asteroid Scout Flight demonstration. That's how we got the
okay.
Solar Cruiser mission started. And now the S5, which is supposed to fly in 2029.
Hmm.
So once you learn the system, which takes
Hmm.
time,
Yeah.
you can turn tech push into tech pull and open
Yeah.
up offers. So that's an example.
And I think that there's a couple of ways to go from there. That insight that you have to learn the system first. I mean, I think that's true across every industry. Inertia is not just is a natural consequence of the universe and every endeavor, human and otherwise. And I should say that I think that I owe you a thank you for that effort with the decadal, because in 2011, when I wrote my first NIAC proposal, it was to basically do Voyager follow on with solar sails. And I'm pretty
Uh-huh.
sure we referenced the decadal from the previous decade. And reading the decadal survey is, well, and also I should say the decadal survey, it sounds like it's this massive effort every 10 years, but it's really continuous. People are either reading and digesting it after it comes out, or thinking about the next one, or then actually working on the next one. So at least that was my experience in the planetary science decadal.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
I'm working with a team at even in my current state as an independent consultant at Brown University, who are
Mm,
looking at a planetary mission to Mercury and trying to influence the next decadal. I mean,
great.
it's part of
And it,
the way it works.
and there's it's also a forum where a lot of the solar system politics comes out, as everyone wants their pet planet mission. And it always goes back to me where if you think about when we went to the moon the first time, okay, here's a segue I didn't plan on, but when you haven't left the Earth at all as a society or a civilization or a species, hey, forget any planet you might have evolved on. Your moon is probably your first destination. If you got one moon, then you got an easy choice. But once you've demonstrated the capability to go to the moon, and if you happen to live in our solar system, it's really not at all obvious where you would go next. And I think that the history of planetary exploration bears that out, leading up to this day where the debates over should we do Mars sample return or should we go do the clouds of Venus or whatever in a limited resource environment, that debate is always going to happen. So it can become a sort of Game of Thrones thing at a planetary scale politically.
Hopefully, a little less bloodthirsty.
Hopefully, hopefully.
No beheadings in there.
But I wanted to go back to the chief technologist role. So is there sort of a council of chief technologists across the centers that goes to headquarters? That I never got to see. It would seem to me there's a back and forth, sort of a council of wizards or something.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting comparison. Well, there was. There is not
Mm,
now, to the best of my knowledge.
okay.
When I was selected for the role, there was a
Mm,
robust group of center chief technologists. Every NASA
mm,
field center had one, and the NASA chief technologist. And we met quarterly in person, usually
okay.
at a space or technical conference, where we
Mm,
would be able to go out and see what the latest things the vendors are doing, the startups, et cetera,
mm,
et cetera. And then we would take an extra 1 or 2 days of our own meetings to help decide how we're going to collaborate together. For instance, how
mm,
my investment in this new water reclamation system that could be used in space, I'd get with my counterpart at the Johnson Space Center,
mm,
where human space flight is, and we'd figure out how to work together to get that moving forward, get new initiatives started, that kind of thing. And it was always chaired by the NASA chief technologist.
okay.
But when the Trump administration came in, that leadership at headquarters was the first to go.
Okay.
Currently, there is no position, I don't believe, at NASA for a chief
Mm,
technologist or a chief scientist. And during the course of events of the DOGE activities and the rephasing of what the
mm,
federal government does, the position of chief technologist has diminished dramatically in importance. And
okay.
most centers, I'm not even sure, have them now, a year later.
Oh, interesting.
So the need has not gone away.
Right.
When I announced my retirement, our center director said, "Don't leave. We still need this job done. We want you to help direct things. We'll find a way to make sure your time is covered within,
Uh,
the projects that are there." But it was time for me to go, and part of that was driven, quite honestly, by the
mm,
dissolution of the whole CTO process.
sure. Again, sort of like Saruman kicking out Gandalf.
So, yeah, it's
As other
unfortunate.
forces, I'll leave the Lord of the Rings
Yeah.
comparisons there. Well, it certainly seems like this administration has kind of outsourced that role to industry, to be generous, to tell NASA what technologies and sources of those technologies it should rely on. You think that's accurate?
Well, there's always been that connection, right? I
Uh-huh.
mean, the way and I'm not going to be too hard on the administration for this part of
Mm,
it. I can be for getting rid of the CTOs and all the
mm,
technologists, the chief scientists. I think that was a mistake. But in terms of how NASA does things, remember,
mm,
a lot of people forget it's a political organization. The
mm,
NASA administrator is appointed by the president. That administrator comes in and picks the leadership at the centers and everywhere else of he wants, and they serve at his
sure.
pleasure, his or her pleasure, right? They see congressmen all the time. They have to
Yeah.
report to Congress. Congress appropriates the budget. Congress decides
Mm,
down to the project level how
yeah.
much money any given project gets in this big spreadsheet of the federal budget.
Yeah.
Who talks to congressmen? Contractors,
Yeah.
SpaceX, Blue Origin, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman.
Mm,
Small business A, B, or C from Huntsville goes
mm,
to talk to our congressperson. Those Congress
mm,
people take notes and their staffers take notes. Next thing you know, that influences the budget process, influences the line item for a
mm,
particular project at a particular center and what that center does. So people talk about, well, NASA shouldn't have done this or done that. Hey,
mm.
don't blame the civil servants for doing what the politicians tell us to do
Right.
because we do what the politicians do. Now, that said, to be fair, most of the time, if
Mm,
somebody at NASA technically goes back to the Congress and says, this is really a dumb idea and here's why, they
mm.
will listen and that will go away. But you
Okay.
have to be very selective in your battles. You
Sure.
can't push back on everything, right?
Right.
So a lot of things get done because, well, it's not the way we really want to do it, but we really don't want to fall and die on this hill. Let's fall and die on this other hill. We'll just let
Sure.
this go and we'll do it this way. So that's the insight into the way that the budget process affects how the technologies that I wanted to invest in were funded.
And I think that that reality, I think, frustrates a lot of engineers and engineering-minded people because, as you said, you have to be careful with your political capital, even on engineering trades.
You do.
Uh, and that I think someone who maybe works at a small engineering company who can't doesn't have who has to trade basically for survival of the company. I think it's bewildering that our largest systems like Artemis II are not done that way, are not designed that way. And I think that's I've found in conversations, it's people are shocked to hear that, but then they get the light bulb moment of, oh, that's why it takes 20 years to do something.
That's why it takes 20 years.
So,
And again, it's not every system. I mean, some are, it's the right thing to do, right? But oftentimes it's not. And the
mm,
leadership has to decide, okay, which one do I call the congressman about and which one do I just let it
mm,
go, right?
interesting. Yeah.
Tough calls.
Well, let's move to something more, I think, universally inspiring, the Artemis II
Yay,
mission that
good.
right
Please.
now is what, 400,000, much closer to the
No,
moon
that's
than
too
that.
far.
40,000, maybe 40,000 miles from the moon. Well, actually, in your role at Marshall, did you oversee or lead anything that is flying to the moon right now, flying around the moon right now?
Well, it's interesting. You should ask that because I've given a lot of introspection to that over the last
Hmm.
several weeks. And
Okay.
I had a payload on Artemis 1. I was the lead
Okay.
for the Near Earth Asteroid Scout spacecraft that
Mm,
was launched on Artemis 1. So I learned all about the integration and was part of the
okay.
integration team. But back in the late 2000s,
Mm,
I was the deputy manager of Marshall's Advanced Concepts Office, which,
okay.
if you went to JPL, that's sort of like their Team X,
Mm,
right?
mm,
They're the group of engineers and scientists who do the trade studies and the initial concept designs of future missions.
mm,
Well, that was back in the time period where we thought we were going to the moon for the second time in my career, but we won't go back and
mm,
rehash that. But
mm,
our office was told, okay, we need a big vehicle to go to the moon. And
mm,
your constraints are A, B, C, D, and E. Go design that vehicle, run the flight analysis trades, and come up with a concept that'll meet this requirement. That was us. So the office that I was the deputy manager for, I was not the person running the codes. That was a team who
mm,
worked for us. But my boss and I, we managed them. We
mm,
interfaced with the people who were sending the money to go do this. And the
mm,
initial design for the rocket that took the astronauts on their way, that they're on their way
mm.
today, originated on computer screens in the office that I was the deputy manager for.
Well, that's fantastic. I remember on Wednesday when it was launching, I had my eyes on the shuttle engines, and especially as they lit up, I felt a great wave of relief. I don't think it's controversial to say.
Very reliable engine.
Yeah,
Very, very reliable.
but
Yeah.
older every day. And so that's really exciting. So it must feel incredible to have seen that perform so well, perfectly, really, right? I mean, on Wednesday.
It did. The initial flight was amazing. First launches of new rockets are historically not kind. They often go
Yeah,
boom, right?
yeah,
And this one just performed flawlessly. Everything on the robotic unmanned mission. That's why Artemis II, they felt comfortable putting the crew on, is
sure.
because they had very, very few problems. And with the very public exception of the toilet problem in Orion,
Hmm.
the
Yeah,
mechanical systems of this whole vehicle have performed like right in spec. I mean,
yeah.
it's just been beautiful.
Well, and even with the toilet, what I read that it was almost is actually a minor case of operator error, that there was some fluid that had to be introduced to,
Yeah.
not a human fluid, but some liquid that was supposed to get the fan going, and
No,
it wasn't.
they've had
So
some other issues
something
too,
like
but I
that.
don't want to
Oh,
talk about
okay.
the toilet.
Okay.
I will say though that it's all that has to work, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
all of it has to work for something like this to go. And all the systems have to play together and talk together.
Mm,
And when you think about the unpleasant circumstances in the command module for the Apollo missions,
mm,
where they were nearing completion of the mission, where those at that time, three men were like sitting right next to each other in a confined space about the size of a Volkswagen. And you think about all they have to do being human in that time period.
mm.
It must have been really tough.
Well, see,
So
that reality has always actually introduced a bit of romance for me to space exploration, because no matter what incredible machinery we build, we are still, primate biological machines with all of the needs that those have. And it's been 60 years and we finally have a real toilet up there, I mean, uh,
well, it's
and
we're human, and I think
yeah,
we're going to take all of our human foibles with us. I am not an idealist.
yes,
I'm an idealist in optimistic sense, but I'm also a realist.
yeah,
When we go to space in a big way with humans, let's say we have moon bases, we have space commerce, we're developing all that.
mm,
There will be drama. There will be the inevitable human failings.
yeah, we'll have,
Unfortunately, there will probably be a murder in space at some day in
we'll
the
have
future.
wars. Yeah.
There'll be people in conflict. It's
Mm,
just part of being human. What we want to do, though, is manage it so it doesn't get out of control and try to be as
right.
civilized as we can, you know?
Well, Well, and that's why that the survival mode, the early human space flight, which I think we're still in, is almost is inspiring in a way because we don't have the luxury of bickering over the kinds of things we fight over on Earth all the time.
Oh.
We don't have that luxury in the Orion capsule where we're all sharing the same recycled air and water. And that gives me, and the history of humanity kind of shows that after a certain population size, all the same things keep happening. But for now at least, our human journeys are bringing out the best of us, I think. And when I was watching the stream on Wednesday night, I was actually focused on the comment section, which is usually such a sewer on the internet. but I saw people from all over the world, thousands of them, cheering for humanity and
Amen.
responding to this example of positive American leadership that has always meant a lot to me. And so actually long after the rocket left the camera view, I just watched the comments roll in, and that kind of really reminded me of one of the big reasons why I think this stuff is so important. It's still only the US that's doing these exploratory, inspiring things. As much as the politics are there, they're everywhere, but we're the only ones doing this exploration. So I take
China's
some.
close on our heels. I mean, a lot of
Oh
people
yeah,
underplay, the Chinese, but they have a space station in orbit. They're
yeah,
regularly sending astronauts to and
yeah.
from, like we do with our partners in the
Hmm.
International Space Station, and they're planning to be on the moon
Hmm.
soon. And
And
I would not underestimate their capabilities.
I do not. I definitely do not. And in the last couple episodes of my podcast, we talked with some other guests on that exact subject. I hope to do so more. But for last week, at least,
You're right.
we're the only society openly sharing with the world, hey, we're going to the moon and the space toilet has a hiccup. That's that's a relatable human story that
It
is
is.
resonating around the world. So on the topic of relatable human stories, I wonder, having now witnessed two campaigns to the moon in your lifetime, and in the middle of them become a science fiction author. What does that feel like? Because
Wow.
yeah.
That's really good. I wish I had my book right here to show you. My first science fiction novel was called Back to the Moon.
Hmm,
Okay.
perfect.
And
Okay.
I co-wrote it with my good friend and colleague, Travis Taylor, who I continue to
Mm,
collaborate with.
hmm.
And it was a novel of the first U.S. landing to return to the moon, not the flyby,
Mm,
but the landing and competition with the Chinese is
okay.
exactly what that book is about. And
Yeah.
it's a little dated because it was written over 10 years ago, but not that much.
Mm,
I mean, you just have to change a few of the names, and it
yeah.
really could almost be out of the headlines today. So to me, that's pretty cool,
Yeah.
because I had actually not really thought much about that book because it was written so long ago. And
Mm,
then my publisher said, "Hey, by the way, Back to the Moon," and it's like, "Oh my gosh, you're right," and because I had moved on to other books and other things.
hmm.
But yeah, that's right. And so it's kind of cool. It is kind of cool. And there's a spin in and spin out of my books for
Uh-huh.
what I do and the technologies. Obviously, I'm inspired by science fiction, and that's what in our previous episode we talked about how that led to me to want to go
Mm,
develop some of this tech. But it also works the other way in that
hmm.
there have been moments in my career where something at work creates an idea that I then follow
Mm,
up on at home and over the weekends
mm.
and a novel. My
Okay.
novel Mission to Methany, which is the first contact story, was born in a risk management meeting at NASA.
Perfect. That sounds like the best outcome of one of those meetings.
Well, for those who don't know what a risk management meeting is, they at first are kind of fun. It's where everybody on the team gets in a room and someone puts up a screen and starts typing, okay, what can go wrong? And let's list all these
Mm,
things out. And that part of it's kind of fun, right? Because
mm,
you're identifying, oh man, this could happen, that could happen, whatever. What gets arduous about it is over time, you then have to prioritize, rank,
mm.
score, weigh them in terms of what it means in cost, schedule, and budget. And then the ones you have to accept and the
Yeah.
ones you have to go get money to go fix. So it gets pretty, quite frankly, hair pulling after a while. But, sometimes you'll hear a potential failure mode that is so interesting, well, at least for
Mm.
me, that I ended up creating a whole novel based on that. Based on that. Yeah,
Well, and then you also have to accept the limits of what you can address and live with that.
you do. You do. Yeah,
That can be very difficult. I can only imagine the list for Artemis II.
huge.
But so far, the the triaging seems to have been appropriate. So on Wednesday night, I was really struck with the fact that this was actually happening because I've always dreamed of seeing it. I was born in 1982. I never saw it the first time. It really recontextualized a lot of NASA history for me and really put it in a global perspective because, the journeys across the oceans over the last 1,000 years, they were sometimes separated by 50 years,
Yeah.
or 100 years. And that's even when the first journey failed. And so if we look back at this period from 500 years from now, it might not even seem like that long between Apollo and Artemis. It's just that the humans of this time have a different perspective on information and time and so on, because we expect things so much faster. And as I'm just sort of thinking off the top of my head here, I mean, how does that, from your perspective, having seen Apollo and now Artemis, I mean, what does that say to you in terms of storytelling and how you would kind of, or does it affect how you would kind of open the aperture sort of on our, dreaming and science fiction?
Well, I think science fiction did real science and exploration a bit of a disservice. And
Mm,
that is that our technology in space travel was advancing rapidly, but it reached a plateau with the moon
mm,
because the funding dried up, is essentially the
yeah.
reason it plateaued. But the public expectation of space travel capability did not plateau until much later.
Uh,
And we were in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
mm,
I didn't see it
mm,
in the first run of the theaters. I was very small. I was alive, but I was
mm,
very small,
mm,
very young, wouldn't have understood it if I had. And then, you had the whole Star Trek
mm,
phenomenon and then Star Wars and all these
mm,
things up through the 70s. And I think people were getting frustrated with the pace of space exploration because science fiction made it look like we were just on the verge of being at Alpha Centauri. Okay. And it wasn't until I think the Challenger disaster that science fiction basically recalibrated and said, hey, wait a minute,
interesting.
this may not happen as fast as we thought. And I'm anthropomorphizing a
Sure.
genre, forgive me.
Sure.
But I know a
Yeah.
lot of science fiction writers, and my conversations with them over the years, I think most of them agree. It was
Wow.
the trajectory in real spaceflight, the slope changed and became flat, but science fiction expectations kept going
Yeah.
up, and we weren't meeting those expectations, and it frustrated people. And then they realized, oh, when we lost that
Yeah.
crew, like, man, maybe this isn't going to go as fast, and and everything. So that's kind of how I view the whole mishmash of that. And the other thing is, when
Interesting.
someone first pointed out to me how many years it was between
Mm,
Columbus, the Europeans first actually
mm,
documenting and discovering North America,
mm.
between then and the American Revolution. Think about this: 1592, 1592, 1692
Yeah.
to 1776. That was over
Yeah.
250 years, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and in most of our brains, they were like, 1 week and the next week. But it was
Right.
250 years, okay?
Yeah. And
So
it's
if you
only
look
been
at what
another
we're doing
250
today and you
years.
take that
Yeah.
50 years that it's taken, yeah, in historical context, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
It's not that long. But in our life experience and in what we were expecting, we
Mm.
were disappointed it took so long.
Well, and it's not just the public. I mean, NASA, my understanding is that as early as the early 1969 itself was expecting to continue on to
Yes,
Mars and with the Saturn V architecture, as I understand it. I mean, that must have been
they were actually
devastating.
building the Nerva nuclear rocket engine
Hmm.
to put on the Saturn V to use as an upper stage to go
Yeah.
to Mars, right? So there were nuclear rockets being developed in collaboration with the Defense
Mm,
Department, of course, but all
mm,
those and a bigger version of the Saturn V, I think it was going to be called Nova or something like that, was
uh,
going to be built, and
uh,
all that, of course, was canceled thanks to the Vietnam War and Richard Nixon, which is a whole other
yeah.
set of
Yes.
topics to discuss. But yeah, that was iced all at that time.
Well, I recently happened to read, I don't want to totally deviate to Vietnam, but I recently read a very long book about Vietnam, and it really put into contrast for me that for many years in the 60s, the president, whoever he was at the time, must have gone from meetings, briefings on Vietnam to briefings about Apollo in the same morning.
Yeah.
And that perhaps it's just my generation or my age group perspective, but the idea of to me, looking back at the best of America and maybe not so much the best, to be generous, that contradiction in the same workday, it just seems like a remarkable thing to have been part of. Perhaps it was a little more operational and pragmatic than philosophical lens that I'm looking at it through. But it just strikes me as it must have been a remarkable kind of headspace to be in. I'd love
Well,
to get a
and
guest on
today,
the show
though,
who was there, but I haven't found him yet.
well, and just think about today, right?
Mm.
Wasn't it the same day we launched Artemis to the moon that the president came out and gave his press briefing on the Iran conflict
Oh,
2 hours
yeah.
later?
Yeah.
So I don't think space exploration will allow us to put all of our terrestrial concerns behind us.
Sure. Well, and it's never
I
been
wish it would.
independent of them. Yeah. And it's never
I
been
wish.
independent of them. And of course, announcing a NASA budget cut in the presidential budget while they're on the way to the moon could have been a little more sensitively done. They could have waited a week.
Well, and just also context, context, context. I
Yeah.
mentioned the political bit earlier, and it was kind
Mm.
of negative. The
Mm.
president's budget request last year for this
Mm.
year was a dramatic cut in the NASA budget. After Congress got through with it, NASA's budget went up.
Mm. Yeah.
So just because the president requests it doesn't mean it's going to happen. It means
Sure.
Congress has to roll up their sleeves, and are they going to accept it? And
Sure.
fortunately, they didn't
Right. Right.
last year.
And I don't think that they will again, but I think it sends very discouraging messages to
Absolutely.
the teams when we need them to be positive. I think that the reality, this is something I'm glad I was exposed to, as depressing as it can be, but I think that there's a term, it'll come to me in 2 hours, where you held to, there's a dissonance in how people, even who work for NASA, think NASA works and how it actually works. And I think
Absolutely.
I think that that's not great for morale, but neither would be on your orientation day saying, here's how it actually works.
No, that would be
So
very
that would
discouraging.
not be good either. Yeah. So
But
I don't know how to
again,
square
I've got
that.
to give you context, context,
Yeah.
context, context.
Okay.
When Neil Armstrong landed on the moon,
Mm.
Nixon had already canceled Apollo 18 and 19. And if you come to
Really?
Huntsville, to the U.S.
Okay.
Space and Rocket Center, we have a full-size, honest-to-goodness, built-to-fly in space Saturn V
Yes.
inside a building hanging from the ceiling that you can walk under that was supposed to launch as Apollo 18. It didn't happen, and it was canceled
Yeah.
before Neil Armstrong put his boot print
Wow.
on.
I've seen the one in Houston. I did not know, and I thought that had been done after when we had won, right? I did not know that was before.
They were being built. They were in production. These two
Wow.
were essentially finished, and those missions were canceled.
But I just want to make sure that I get the timing right. So the decision to cancel was made before we actually won the race.
Yes.
Was it done?
That's my understanding, that Nixon had already given some kind of, there's a
Wow.
memo or something in the White House
Yeah.
records that says we're going to end this and declare
Wow.
victory and quit.
Interesting. I thought it was after, which would make more sense, but it's even more kind of pragmatic to have done it before, saying regardless of the outcome, we're done. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, and
Interesting.
I could just real quick. I'm sorry, I have to throw this out there. Put yourself in the mindset of Richard Nixon, president of the United States. Humans are landing on the moon for the first time, right? You're going to be the president. You signed the plaque. It's going to be on the moon. Great. You turn on the TV. What do you see over and over and over again on TV? You see John F. Kennedy saying, we will be on the moon before the decade is out. Safely return a man to the moon. I'm not trying to mock him. I'm just saying he's very adamant. That speech at Rice University is everywhere because everybody's honoring a dead president. Rewind 1860. Who did John F. Kennedy beat for the presidency? Richard M. Nixon. Okay. So Nixon lost to Kennedy. There were questions about the legitimacy of the election because of voting in Illinois. No comment there. He conceded the election. He lost. But the man who beat him is getting credit for something that's happening on his watch.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're as vindictive as we understand Nixon was, right?
Yeah.
How would you feel about that?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm sure there was a very deep-seated personal motivation that was underlying that decision.
Yeah. And one would hope that the magnitude of the events would lead a man or a woman to put such things aside, but we know humans are humans.
I can't say I was in the mind of Richard Nixon. I wouldn't want to be there. But at the same time, in my personal opinion, reading the history, I'm sure that was a part of his decision.
Sure. Well, and what an impactful decision it was for 50 years.
50 years.
And here we are again, approaching the moon as we speak. So, yeah, so I know you have just a few minutes left here. I wonder what thoughts you would leave on a momentous day like today, not perhaps as momentous as the landing in a few years, but still a big day. From your perspective, are all of them, from NASA technologist, science fiction author, Apollo kid, what do you have to say?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of facts and figures you could throw out at people, but I think the
Mm,
biggest one for me is the fact that we are going back, and I think there's enough
mm,
political will to keep it funded on both sides. And the difference between today and 1968 is there is a robust commercial space industry that's going to go with us. It's
I
not
see.
all funded by the government.
Yeah,
Now, going to the moon is mostly and not exclusively funded, but in space in general, there is a
yeah,
robust industrial base, and there are people with money and influence who want to make it happen.
right.
And I think that's a key difference between today
Mm,
and the 1960s. And
yeah.
I think it is the key to making it sustainable this time
Mm,
so that 50 years from now, we don't have generations of podcasters talking about, well, when we stop going in 2032,
yeah.
we're going to keep going. Now, I don't believe Mars is as close as NASA says it is. I don't believe it.
Mm,
I
yeah.
think we could do it, but I think it's further out in time. I think we're going to see
Yeah.
consolidation on the moon, which is fine with me. So
Mm,
I'm pumped.
yeah. I like that. I like that this idea of future podcasters bemoaning what was lost. But I think we'll leave that for the future.
It's not going to happen. We're going to stay this
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Celebrate today. Yeah. Well, once again, a really enjoyable discussion. Thank you. And
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
I think we did justice to your story as the chief technologist in this context of Artemis. So that was my goal, and I think that I'm very happy about that. I hope it's been interesting for the audience. So I will let you go. You got a busy day today, and I really appreciate your time again. Maybe we'll do another discussion in the future. I hope we do. Yeah, everybody listening, today was the day we circled the moon again. So if you're listening today, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on the Space Madness podcast.
All right. Bye bye.